Aita, my mill shoved me and I don't want her visiting our next planned visit. So here's what happened. I'm 25F. My husband is 27M, and we have a 4-year-old daughter. A couple of weeks ago, my MIL, 50F, and FIL came to stay with us for a weekend. The plan was for all of us to attend my nephew's birthday party, which was about an hour away from our house. For some context, the party was 2 hours from where Emiel and Phil live, so it made sense for them to stay with us and then head to the party together. Well, the day of the party, it snowed. Hard. We live in an area that isn't exactly great about clearing the roads quickly, and both of our cars are FWD sedans. Not exactly snow-friendly. We decided it just wasn't safe to drive, so we stayed home. Apparently, that decision didn't sit well with MIL. I didn't realize how upset she was until I walked into the living room and heard her going off on my husband. She was saying things like, "You always put her family first," and really laying into him about how we didn't make it to the party. Now, let me clarify. Yes, we do make it to more of my family's events. But that's because my family is huge. They live much closer to us. And honestly, they put in the effort to show up for things like our daughter's birthday or her school events. It's not like we're playing favorites. It's just logistics. Plus, we've missed plenty of my family's events too, and I even pointed that out to Mill, giving her specific examples to back it up. Anyway, this back and forth turned into a full-blown argument. Things got heated fast. I moved closer to where Mill was sitting. Not aggressively or anything, just to try and make my point face to face. That's when she stood up, and before I knew it, she shoved me. In my own house, in front of my 4-year-old daughter. My husband jumped between us immediately, trying to calm things down. He kept saying things like, "We're family, we need to work this out." But at that point, I was done. I told him I wanted them to leave. Emiel did give a half-hearted apology, and I apologized too, mostly to keep the peace, but let's be real. It wasn't genuine on either side. I couldn't shake the fact that she put her hands on me in front of my child. That's a line you don't cross, no matter how angry you are. Here's where it gets more frustrating. They didn't leave right away. They stayed for 2 more days, and it was the most awkward, tension-filled 48 hours of my life. Now, they're supposed to come back in 3 weeks for another visit, and I really don't want them here. My husband thinks I'm being unreasonable and holding a grudge, but I don't see it that way. Actions have consequences, and I don't feel comfortable pretending like this didn't happen. It's not just about the shove, it's about the disrespect, the fact that it happened in front of my kid, and that I'm expected to just sweep it under the rug for the sake of family harmony. So, Reddit, AITA for not wanting her back in my house? I feel like I'm setting a boundary, but my husband thinks I'm overreacting. Would love to hear your thoughts. Update 1 week later. Hey everyone! I wanted to provide an update since so many of you took the time to weigh in on my situation. First of all, thank you for all the support, advice, and even the tough love. It really helped me feel less alone in all of this. So, here's where things stand now. After the dust settled and my in-laws left, my husband and I had a long, overdue conversation about everything that happened. To his credit, he listened, really listened, for the first time in a while. I explained, as calmly as I could, how deeply hurt and disrespected I felt, not just by his mom's actions, but also by the expectation that I'm supposed to just move on, like nothing happened. I told him that it's not about holding a grudge, it's about setting boundaries, especially when our daughter was a witness to the whole thing. He didn't get defensive, which was a pleasant surprise. Instead, he admitted that he'd been trying to keep the peace in a way that avoided dealing with the real issue. He also admitted that he was afraid of upsetting his mom because she has a long history of guilt-tripping and overreacting to perceived slights. Apparently, this is a pattern that goes way back, even before I was in the picture. I could see that he was stuck between wanting to support me and not wanting to rock the boat with his mom. I get it, I really do. But I told him that this can't just be about keeping his mom happy anymore. There's a child involved now, and we both need to set an example for her about respect and boundaries. After a lot of back and forth, he agreed that something needed to be done. We decided that the first step would be to sit down with Emiel and have an honest conversation about what happened. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of seeing her again so soon. but my husband pointed out that letting this drag on would just make things worse. The longer we wait, the more resentment builds, and the harder it'll be to resolve anything. The plan is to meet her, and Phil, if he wants to be involved, at a neutral location, probably a coffee shop or something. That way, if things go south, we're not trapped in our house with them again. We want to make it clear that the shove was completely unacceptable, that our home is our safe space, and that moving forward, there need to be some ground rules for how we all interact. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'll admit I'm also nervous. MIL isn't exactly known for taking accountability or handling criticism well. Part of me wonders if this conversation will just blow up in our faces, but at least we'll know we tried to address things head on. Also, for those of you wondering about our daughter, we've been extra mindful about keeping things stable and positive for her. She hasn't mentioned the incident, and we're doing our best to keep it that way. She's only 4, and I don't want her carrying the weight of adult conflicts on her little shoulders. So that's where we are. The conversation with ML is set for this weekend, and I'll be back to update you all on how it goes. Fingers crossed it doesn't turn into another mess. Thank you again for your advice and support. It's really helped me feel stronger going into this next step. Stay tuned.
Update
2 weeks later. Hi everyone, I'm back with another update. A lot has happened since my last post, and I wanted to share how things went when we sat down with Emil to talk. Spoiler, it was a roller coaster, but we got through it. So, as planned, my husband and I met MIL and Fiel, who tagged along but stayed mostly quiet, at a coffee shop over the weekend. I was on edge the entire morning leading up to it. My stomach was in knots, and I kept playing out worst-case scenarios in my head. What if she denied everything? What if she started yelling in public? What if this conversation just made things worse? When we got there, MIL was already seated with her arms crossed, looking like she was preparing for battle. My husband tried to break the ice with some small talk, but she wasn't having it. She jumped straight in with, "So what is it you want to say to me?" in a tone that immediately put me on the defensive. I took a deep breath and started by saying that this wasn't about attacking her or pointing fingers, but about clearing the air and setting boundaries so we could move forward in a healthier way. I told her that I was still deeply hurt by what happened, especially the fact that it happened in front of my daughter, and that I needed her to understand why that was such a big deal to me. Her immediate response? Defensiveness. She said things like, "Well, I was upset and I felt provoked, and you came at me in an aggressive way too." She even tried to downplay the shove, saying it wasn't that serious and that I was blowing it out of proportion. I could feel my anger bubbling up, but I didn't want to give her more ammunition to paint me as the villain. So I stayed calm, somehow, and kept explaining my side. At this point, my husband jumped in. He backed me up completely, which meant a lot, because I know how hard it is for him to confront his mom. He told her that what happened wasn't okay, no matter how upset she was, and that it crossed a line. He also made it clear that while we want to keep her in our lives, things need to change, starting with her taking responsibility for her actions. It took a while, and I mean a while, but eventually, Mel started to soften. I think hearing it from her son, not just me, finally made her realize how serious this was. She admitted that she let her emotions get the best of her and said she regretted how she handled things. Then, to my surprise, she actually apologized. It wasn't a perfect apology. She threw in a few buts and "if I made you feel that way" qualifiers. But it was something. And honestly, it's more than I thought we'd get. From there, the conversation shifted to how we can prevent something like this from happening again. My husband suggested the idea of family counseling, and to my shock, Emile agreed. She said she's willing to try it if it'll help us all get along better. I think part of her motivation is that she doesn't want to lose access to her granddaughter, but hey, I'll take it. Whatever gets us moving in the right direction. We're now in the process of finding a therapist who specializes in family dynamics. I'm cautiously optimistic about this step, but I'm also realistic. Therapy only works if everyone is genuinely committed, and I'm not entirely convinced MIL is there yet. She's made it clear that she still feels some resentment toward me for pulling her son away. Her words, not mine. So there's a lot to unpack. As for Phil, he didn't say much during the meeting, but he did pull me aside afterward and quietly apologized for not stepping in sooner. He said he just doesn't know how to handle conflict and tends to stay out of things. I appreciated the gesture, but it also reinforced for me why MIL behaves the way she does. She's used to being the dominant voice in their relationship without much pushback. So, where does this leave us? Well, they're still planning to visit in a couple of weeks, but we've agreed to keep things low-key and avoid any big family events for now. My husband and I have also decided to set some firm boundaries about what behavior is acceptable in our home. If MIL crosses those boundaries again, she won't be welcome here. No exceptions.
Yep.
I know some of you might think I'm being too forgiving, and I get it. Part of me wanted to just cut ties and be done with it. But I also believe in giving people a chance to grow, especially when there's a genuine effort being made. I don't expect Mill to change overnight, but I do hope this is the start of a healthier dynamic. If it's not, then at least I'll know I tried. Update 3, 1 month later.
A lot has happened over the past month, and I'm honestly still trying to process it all. Buckle up, because this one's a mix of progress, surprises, and new challenges.
To start, my husband, MIL, and I have now attended 2 family counseling sessions. The sessions were interesting. The therapist was great, calm, neutral, and skilled at guiding the conversation. But it was clear from the beginning that MIL wasn't entirely comfortable with the process. She admitted reluctantly that she agreed to come mostly because she didn't want to be cut off from her granddaughter. While that's not the ideal motivation, I figured it was better than nothing. The first session was mainly about laying everything out on the table. I expressed my concerns about the incident, my boundaries, and the importance of respecting our home as a safe space. Emiel, to her credit, didn't deny or deflect as much as I expected. She even acknowledged that her reaction that day was fueled by years of unspoken resentment and frustrations, some of which I had no idea she was harboring. For example, she admitted that she feels like my family has taken over our lives, and that she's been struggling to find her place in the mix. While I don't agree with all of her perspectives, I could see where some of her feelings were coming from. We've naturally spent more time with my family because of proximity and their active involvement in our lives, but that doesn't mean we've intentionally excluded her. It felt like a breakthrough for her to finally say these things out loud instead of letting them fester and explode later. The second session was focused more on actionable steps to improve our relationship. We discussed boundaries, what they look like, why they're important, and how we can all respect them moving forward. I felt like MIL was starting to get it, albeit slowly. She admitted that she struggles with letting go of control and that it's something she wants to work on. Again, it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Now, here's where things take a turn. After the second session, ML suggested we all have dinner together at our house to celebrate moving forward. I was hesitant, but my husband thought it would be a good opportunity to start fresh. So, we agreed. And the dinner itself was fine, cordial, even pleasant at times. But toward the end of the evening, Emil dropped a bombshell. She casually mentioned that she's been thinking about selling her house and moving in with us to help out with the family.
I almost choked on my water.
She framed it as a selfless gesture, how she could help with childcare, cooking, and household chores so we wouldn't have to juggle so much. She even made it sound like she'd be doing us a favor, saying things like, "You two work so hard, and I'd love to make things easier for you." But all I could think about was how this could undo all the progress we've made and reignite every issue we've been trying to resolve. I didn't say much in the moment because I didn't want to cause a scene in front of my daughter. My husband, however, immediately tried to steer the conversation in a neutral direction, saying something like, "That's a big decision. We'd have to think it over carefully." MIL didn't push further, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled with his lukewarm response. After they left, I told my husband in no uncertain terms that this was not going to happen. I understand that MIL might genuinely want to help, but I know her well enough to see the red flags. She struggles with boundaries now. How would that improve if she were living under the same roof? And let's be honest, the dynamics of having your in-laws move in are rarely as rosy as people hope they'll be. My husband agreed, thankfully. He said he didn't think it was a good idea either, especially considering how much work we've been putting into re-establishing boundaries. He promised to handle the situation and let his mom know that moving in isn't an option. But here's the thing. I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Emil has a way of wearing people down over time. and I'm worried she'll keep bringing it up until my husband feels guilty enough to cave. I trust him to stand firm for now, but I also know how persistent she can be. It's exhausting to feel like I always have to be on guard. On the bright side, the counseling sessions have opened up some productive conversations between me and my husband. He's been more proactive about standing up for me and setting boundaries with his mom, which is a big step forward. I just wish we didn't have this new complication hanging over our heads. So that's where we are. I'm trying to stay optimistic, but the thought of MIL moving in has me on edge. Has anyone else dealt with a situation like this? How do you shut down the idea of cohabiting with in-laws without it turning into a massive family drama? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I'll keep you all updated as this unfolds. Fingers crossed we can handle this without undoing all the progress we've made.
Update 4.
Final update, 2 months later. Hi everyone. This will be my last update on this situation. First, I want to thank you all for your continued support, advice, and encouragement. This experience has been overwhelming at times, but having a place to share and hear different perspectives has made it so much easier to navigate. So, where do things stand now? After a lot of discussions, debates, and careful consideration, my husband and I decided to firmly say no to MIL's request to move in with us. Instead, we offered a compromise. She's welcome to visit on occasional weekends, giving her the chance to spend time with our family while still maintaining the boundaries we've worked so hard to establish. When we told her, I braced for the worst. But, surprisingly, MIL took it reasonably well, much better than I expected. While I could tell she was disappointed, she seemed to understand our reasoning, especially since we framed it as a way to preserve everyone's independence and avoid unnecessary stress on our relationships. She even said something along the lines of, "I can see how this is better for everyone," which, coming from her, felt like a small miracle. Since then, we've hosted her for 2 weekend visits. I won't lie, the first one was awkward. There was still tension hanging in the air, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells the whole time. But by the second visit, things were noticeably better. We found a rhythm that worked, and MIL even made a visible effort to respect our space and parenting choices. There were still moments where her old habits peeked through. For example, during the second visit, she casually dropped a comment about how much easier things would be if she were around full-time. But instead of letting it spiral, I calmly reminded her of our arrangement and changed the subject. To her credit, she didn't push further, which I took as progress.
No.
One of the biggest breakthroughs has been the family counseling sessions. We've now attended 4 together, and while they haven't magically solved everything, they've helped us start to untangle some of the deeper issues. Emil admitted that she's struggled to adjust to her role as a mother-in-law and has felt left out of our lives compared to my family's involvement. While I don't agree with all her perspectives, hearing her express those feelings in a constructive way has helped me understand where she's coming from. The therapist has also been invaluable in teaching us how to communicate better. I've learned how to set boundaries without coming across as confrontational, and MIL has started to recognize that boundaries aren't about rejecting her. They're about protecting our family's well-being. It's still a work in progress, but the fact that she's trying means a lot. As for my husband, he's been amazing. He's stepped up in ways I didn't expect, from actively supporting me during tough conversations to being the one to reinforce boundaries when needed. It's been a huge relief to feel like we're truly a team in this, and it's strengthened our relationship in ways I didn't realize were possible. Looking back, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that progress doesn't always look like big dramatic changes. Sometimes it's the small wins, like a respectful conversation or a peaceful weekend, that matter most. And while I know there will still be bumps in the road, I'm hopeful that we've laid the groundwork for a healthier, more balanced relationship with Emil moving forward. So, this is where I leave things. Our family is in a much better place than it was 2 months ago, and I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. Thank you again to everyone who followed along and offered your insights. I couldn't have gotten through this without you. Here's to hoping this is the start of a calmer, happier chapter for all of us.